HIV/AIDS touched me early in the 80s. As I sit here, I feel like crying when you ask me such questions, because I lost nearly half of my family to AIDS. In the early 80s, my young sister, who was working in Uganda Railways, she had 3 daughters. Her husband had died, and these were young, and then she developed AIDS. And at that time, it was a life sentence.
And immediately His Excellency came out, I recall he started talking about HIV. It follows the story that he so clearly tells of when he sent some soldiers to Cuba. And when they were tested, which was a requirement, he was called by the Cuban president and told that there is something wrong in your country. We got HIV in some of your soldiers.
Yes, of course, we lost very good fighters, very good, many young men because of AIDS, because of recklessness. And by the way, contrary to what the president was advising, but you know, it's difficult. Young people drinking, and he knew that we were going to suffer. The country was going, the army to suffer, but the country. And that's why the president told the Minister of Health to announce to the whole world that there is a problem in Uganda, and we are dealing with it in this way. And he toured the whole country preaching about AIDS. There is AIDS, there is a disease which has no cure. When you get it, you die.
You should understand that by the time HIV surfaces and starts killing people, you have been infected for a long time before. So during the war with the Tanzanian war with Amin, that was one of the biggest population movements that definitely increased the transmission of HIV infection. So the soldiers, as they moved along, acted as Trojan horses, and they moved with the disease as they lived. And you know, the life of soldiers is a very hectic, enterprising, male-dominated world. So we believe that that's how the disease went ahead and spread. It would have spread anyway. The only difference is that the soldiers, young men, and they just helped it to move. But with or without soldiers, it would still have spread.
So he started talking to the population about HIV. After understanding, he tells his story so clearly. When he came back, he called the then Commissioner for Disease Control, Dr. Kware, and asked him about it. And Dr. Kware knew so much about HIV and gave him the statistics. And then he asked him, but why are you quiet? Why are you not telling the population that we have a problem? Working together with Dr. Kware, so many messages were developed. If you remember the famous drums that would go, and then it would say, there is HIV, it is sexually transmitted, stay safe, avoid unprotected sex. Every day on Radio Uganda, I particularly remember, the messages would come out. And then the president's voice would come out saying, we have a disease called HIV, or slim disease. If you get it through unprotected sex, you will waste away. And so he was emphasizing, abstain and be faithful. And that message went around.
And in 1986, once the government of President Museveni came into power, they said, look, this is trouble. We need help. That's when they called in WHO, that's when they called in the Medical Research Council. Rugunda was the minister, and the president said, look, no, we can't keep quiet. It is useless to keep quiet because we have an enemy. We have to face it. It is already here, we have no choice. So that's when the first program was started in actually the first global program on HIV, on AIDS, was started here in Uganda by the NRM government.
I met the president in 2007 in Lira Hospital, where I was working as the medical superintendent. He had come to pay a visit to one of the patients, a good friend of his who was an RDC but was very sick with cancer. He actually entered the hospital without informing us and went straight to see the patient. And then he called for the head of the hospital. So I was told, somebody wants to see you. I was not told who wanted to see me. And when I came out of my office and I was walking towards where he was, I saw a lot of security. So I asked them what is wrong. And they repeatedly said, nothing is wrong. And I said, but who wants to see me? Said, there is a guest in one of your wards, that was the I unit, who wants to see you. So I walked in there very scared. And when I reached, I found him seated on a chair beside the patient's bed. And so I asked him, how did you get into this hospital? And he smiled.
He was already concerned that there was this disease, and he needed to understand it even more because it was poorly understood. At that time, there wasn't a lot of research, nobody knew where it was coming from, nobody knew where it was going. So he wanted to do more. So when I came up with an idea of doing my research on sexually transmitted diseases, he really was excited about it and sponsored it, gave me a vehicle, gave me the necessary support, and yeah, that's how he got interested. And of course, he didn't stop there. He could very well have got a master's degree in HIV himself. Yeah.
At that time, I think our prevalence was as high as 18%. But of course, in some areas like Rakai, where many people were dying, it was as high as nearly 39% within the population. Now, his message worked very well because the population listened, more so when they saw the people coming to hospital, very thin, with diarrhea, wasting away, and eventually dying. So seeing and at the same time listening, the population responded. And I really must thank God that he has stuck to his message of abstain and be faithful.
Philip Bongole did one of the best things before he died. Number one, he admitted he had HIV infection and he had AIDS. Number two, he was willing to give it a face and tell the young people that, look, here I am sick and I got this infection through this method. Stop it, avoid it. So, and the film of Philip Bongole gives a very, very good story. And but that was not the only media forum, because we also had one of the best plays by Bakayimbira drum actors called Ndiwulira. It's based on the story of a maize weaver that is enjoying maize, asking, get out, we are going to cut this maize. I'll get out when you cut it. Get out, we are going to cook it. I will get out when it is warm. Get out now, it's going to be boiled. Say, no, I'll get out. And then it finally dies in the maize cob, enjoying the maize cob. That's what Ndiwulira was all about.
I don't think we would have reached where we are today if it was not President Museveni. In the 80s, when the management of HIV/AIDS was under the Ministry of Health, he formed what is known as the AIDS Control Program. But there was an advisory committee above that AIDS Control Program, and he was the chairman of the AIDS Committee. To see, even at the time when there was nothing, what can we do? Because at that time, the only thing was advise people about HIV/AIDS and to avoid this very behavior which causes transmission.
A lot of misinformation was out there. So the government needed to give correct information. And so one of our biggest thrust was information and education and communicate accurately, simply, and consistently and that's what the president did. The president communicated a message of prevention consistently and all the time. That's why you hear of ABC. Abstain, 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 abstain. Be faithful to one single partner. If you cannot abstain, you cannot be faithful, then use a condom. That's what ABC was all about.
But from the early 80s up to the mid-90s, there were no antiretroviral drugs. And when it came into the country, our first source was through the Joint Clinical Research Center as a research. However, by then, our prevalence had started going down because of the president's effort to sensitize the communities and empower them to understand that on their own they could actually prevent HIV. And to date, he has remained passionate. He's one of the very few presidents who has launched a fast-track initiative to end AIDS by 2030. And he has been very clear in his fast-track initiative that AIDS must end by 2030. He has put in a lot of effort to ensure that the sick stay alive through taking antiretroviral drugs. To date, we have an estimated 1.4 million people who are thought to have HIV. Out of this estimated 1.4, nearly 1,250,000 are already on drugs. This small number that is not on drugs, we are yet to find where they are, because we get this out of mathematical modeling to tell us the number based on prevalence.
As a government, really, the government of President Museveni was right to institute and support a national program to address HIV, and we did a lot. Because we needed to understand the epidemic, and I can come back later to the achievements of the government. But what stands out clearly is that there is no single speech I can remember that the president gave in this country without talking about HIV. Not a single day.
So many studies have been done about Uganda's success in HIV. It was obvious that it was the messages of the leaders, the president, the first lady, the parliamentarians and ministers, about zero grazing and about abstinence for young people. That's what worked for us. And they came saying, no, we want evidence-based, but it's evidence. We brought down HIV, HIV infection from 33% to 8%. What more evidence do you want? So to actually 5-6%, not 8%.
In any public health effort, you need leadership. If there is no strategic leadership, you can forget about it. You can have the technical competence, the technical knowledge, the money. But if you don't have a strategic vision and a strategic leadership, nothing can succeed. And as somebody who has been in this for such a long time, I'm very glad that the president offered that important leadership. But not the leadership that is not fully informed, but the leadership that is also based on information. As I said, he read probably more than we did. And he talked about something he understood very well. That is the leadership that is important. That's the leadership that is irreplaceable. And he has provided it.
What changes have you witnessed firsthand in Uganda's economic journey, in our social journey, perhaps, so far, from the time you started, from the time you started, working and as an adult properly?
From the time that I started working, there's so many changes. It is easy if to want to take them for granted. But it's really important for us, our generation, the younger people, to know the beginning of the journey. The things that have become commonplace were unheard of. The luxuries we enjoy now were not there.
From 1971 to 86, you have the economy basically declining, and infrastructure was very, very seriously affected. Infrastructure meaning roads, becoming almost unnavigable. You could hardly, it just take me 2 days to go to Kabale, to go from Kampala to Kabale. You go, you reach Mbarara, it's night, then from there, the following day, you are able to reach Kabale. So the infrastructure broke down, and by the time that the NRM came in 1986, there was literally nothing.
Since the days of Amin, the economy was twisted from production to speculation. Magendo. You get something here, it is sold 100 times. Each one putting you on a commission. Each one putting you on a commission. This one sells this paper and he gets 5 cents. Another one sells it again, he gets another 5 cents. So it's now 10 cents more than it would have cost if it had been sold straight from the I know I am hurting some people's interests, but these are illegitimate interests. We are not hurting legitimate interests, we are hurting illegitimate interests. Smuggling is not a legitimate interest. Hoarding is not a legitimate interest. Overcharging is not a legitimate interest. And I am not sorry to hurt such an interest. If it is hurt, I'm very sorry, but I think these fellows who have been depending on that way of living need to readjust their lives to a normal, productive and useful life.
We've actually had a few times where we've told them what it was like, our children, and there is almost unbelief because we live so far from that period. And it's almost like we're telling them a story that couldn't be true, that it couldn't be that dangerous, it couldn't be that you lived with gunshots around your house and you got used to them, that you didn't have power, that the basic necessities were a luxury.
The banks were in a very bad condition, including the central bank. So I had to engage in restructuring of the central bank. I chaired a committee that rewrote the Bank of Uganda Act, and so that at the time there was too much control from the government, Minister of Finance. So yet the Minister of Finance is the one supposed to manage the money for the country. Now, if they could tell the Bank of Uganda to print money, which is exactly what they were doing, then you had all this money all over the place, and the economy could not be stabilized. People don't realize that printing money is very easy. But then it becomes, money is just paper, it's worthless. If you don't have commodities for it to buy, it just becomes worthless. Because it is what we call money illusion. When people think that what counts is money. Money counts when there is goods to buy. But when there are no goods to buy, it's absolutely worthless. It's not even worth the paper on which it is printed.
At that time, 1986, I don't know how big our GDP was. I have not looked it up. But we would not have been able to afford what we have now. So we've had to grow what we afford. We have had to grow the economy to bring in more revenue. And all those things were actually, for example, our agriculture has always been there, tourism has always been there. But building the infrastructure to extract that wealth over the years has allowed us now to see the changes that we see, and in a sense to be closer to the international community than we previously were.
My most exciting moment was when I saw somebody advertising a commodity on television. I said, what? In Uganda someone is advertising? Because the culture was, everybody was looking on who has sugar, who has soap. They would tell you, oh, so-and-so in Nakawa has soap. Everybody now would run to Nakawa to get soap. And maybe you'll find a big line. Or they tell you the government is giving posho in Wandegea. So everybody would go there and find a line, people waiting to get something, to buy something. But now if someone to advertise that I have, we say, oh, is he real?
There is always a before and after of things. And when we talk about modern day Uganda, I think for me, in my mind, the way I describe it is before Museveni and after Museveni. Before President Museveni and after President Museveni. Because the clear-cut change happened when he came with the NRA group into Uganda, into Kampala. That's when you can see what was before and what came after. And the consistency year in, year out since then has delivered the kind of change that we have seen. I can't imagine what it would have been like if there had been an interruption 5 years after he took over, or 10 years after President Museveni became president, because we had been used to that kind of short governments, coups, wars, further destruction. And now you have stability.
President Museveni's message of trade and not aid has been one of his consistent positions. How has this affected Uganda?
Certainly, trade means that I make a choice on what I want to produce and put on the market, as opposed to aid, which again comes with conditionalities. And I think that in the case of Uganda, I think the policy of regional integration has been very, very important. The trade with, I think Kenya is now our biggest trading partner, but generally speaking, our trade with our neighbors has become dominant compared to trade with the UK and Europe in earlier days. So that, and I think that's the fundamental shift, which has been reinforced by now DRC coming in, so that now we'll see trade among regional and African countries becoming the major form of, the major source of income, rather than expecting aid from outside. So I believe that this policy based on focusing on regional integration has been very, very important for increasing the market for our products. And I think it is the way to go.
Look, the way this has been reported to me is not so much that you all are pro, have a high priority for infrastructure, but you have sort of a negative priority for some of the other stuff that we've been involved with for a long time. For instance, primary schooling and basic health and that like. Is that correct?
No, sir. I think if one is forced, is it infrastructure now, roads or primary schools, primary education? If just either or, then he would say probably at this juncture would say, let's have roads first.
It's not a question of primary school or secondary, tertiary, vocational. It's a question of the balance, always.
Okay.
Un cran plus haut et à l'heure du thé, le président de la Banque mondiale, James Wolfensohn, rencontre Yoweri Museveni, l'ex-guerriero devenu dirigeant de l'Ouganda.
So, Your Excellency, I think you got my letter.
I did indeed.
I think the main bottleneck now to our development are the roads. See, if the roads were open, the major ones and the feeder ones, then a number of things would happen. First of all, the peasants would be able to market their crops.
Right.
Then the traders would be able to easily carry goods to the rural areas.
Thanks.
Then also the investors would find it easier to go up country and invest there. So roads go into everything. They affect tourism. Tourists don't want to bump on roads for 20 hours. They want to drive smoothly and go back to the towns. So they affect everything.
You don't have to convince me. If you take roads, you must maintain them. And I think what we did previously was to help on the road maintenance. And we're now looking at the new road program.
In my previous job of fighting,
Yes.
I was used to prioritization. It was our friend Mao Zedong who told us that to hit with both arms
Yes.
in two directions at the same time
Yes.
is bad fighting.
Yes.
You would rather fold your arms and you concentrate your blow
Yes.
in one area
Yes.
and achieve a target.
Obviously, we agree that roads are essential as well. The question of whether it's the only thing you do or whether it's the first thing you do. And it's clear now, I think, as a matter of priority that we should take a look at it. So my guess is you'll get your way, which I think you're used to doing.